Good, better, best. You should never rest till your good is better and your better, best.
A lot of people refer to school days as something that's kind of filled with trauma or sadness, but my school days at George Heriots were, from really beginning to end, really the best days of my life.
Well, we were always told that your school days were going to be the best days of your life, and I would say that I believe that to quite a large extent.
If I had my education all over again, would I come back to Heriot's? Absolutely I would, and I would make more of that opportunity, because this is a great, great opportunity.
We were part of an institution that had done so much for the local community, and also as pupils have left and gone around the world, people who have done so much.
Heriots is a dynamic, kind, high-achieving and wonderfully enjoyable place to be.
When you look back in time, you can see that there are a few things that, no matter what, are true. This could be as simple as 2 + 2 = 4, or even the basic laws of physics. If you tell people about these things, then that knowledge can have a much bigger impact than you know, creating the fact that education changes lives. It empowers people all over the world and provides them with skills and knowledge that, amongst all other things, is priceless. The institution of schools to provide education will always be one of the most important things to ever exist, because they empower people. But each school has an ethos and history that makes them stand out and differ from each other, each one striving to provide more than just knowledge. This is George Heriots School in Edinburgh. Founded in 1628, this school has a long, nearly 400-year history that is still prevalent in its ethos, striving to provide its pupils with more than just facts and figures.
So George Herriot was jeweller to King James VI and first, and he made lots of money, had no legitimate children of his own, but was very forward thinking and was very keen on education and the sort of transformative powers of education. So he left money for hospital to be built, as they called it then, which was an orphanage for fatherless boys, it was at that stage.
But lost his sons, lost his wife, and then his second wife died in childbirth. And, you know, didn't have any family. And brilliantly decided that he wanted to use his money in this massive amount of money in this kind of philanthropic way.
That legacy is something that has lived with me, and from conversations with other FPs, that knowledge, it's the history of the school that is, it's not drummed into you, it's you know, it comes through having been you know, attending the school, having been a pupil, but the knowledge that George Herriot had done so much in his life and decided to leave that legacy of you know, good, of looking after those less well off than himself, particularly you know, the children of widows and widowers, that stays with you.
It's very much what we still do today, because his vision was to distribute cheerfully. It was to provide a good education, to provide it for children who perhaps otherwise would not have got what the education they would here, and that's what we're still doing, and I think that's what makes Heriots really different and really special. I think it's amazing actually that what he wanted is still happening hundreds of years later.
I can remember when we nearly lost Heriots back in 78, 79, there was an attack by Edinburgh Lothian Regional Council to try and convert Heriots into a comprehensive school, and there was a massive appeal, and a lot of the former pupils got together and rallied round the school, and the school was effectively saved. Now the price has been that it is now almost an entirely independent and private school, but at least the school still exists. And from my point of view, it seems to be getting stronger and stronger. A great barometer on how good the school is doing is the waiting list for pupils. And it's not easy to get into the school, which is a great sign, particularly at a time when, you know, it's relatively expensive. But a lot of the parents whose kids are at school, they're making sacrifices because they just appreciate how good the education is here.
One of the main factors that has made Heriot stand out over the years is that from when it was founded, a relevant and forward-thinking ethos was always at the centre of every choice. Today, this ethos and nature of continuing to be forward-thinking can be found everywhere. Most recently, in the introduction of gender-neutral bathrooms, gender-neutral uniforms, and being the first school in Scotland to receive an LGBT Gold Charter Award.
I think Heriots has always been a very sort of forward-thinking school. I think right from the, it's a very unusual thing for somebody at that time, I would imagine, to think of providing a school for children who essentially were orphans.
The ethos has changed as the architecture of the school has changed in some respects. So as a current parent of 2 young children, one in primary 1, wee girl and son in primary 4, I think the ethos has changed, the focus on mindfulness, presenteeism, working hard and being happy.
Ethos is a word, it's an interesting word because as an English teacher I always talk about abstract nouns, and it's an abstract noun, it's not something tangible that you can really put your hand on. Every head teacher, Mrs. Franklin, I'm absolutely sure when she comes in as well, will talk about the word ethos, but it's something that I think it is tangible. Almost at Heriots, we've made it into something which is tangible.
I think it's the relationships between people. I think it is much stronger than it seems to be at some other schools. Whenever visitors come in, I see prospective parents several times a day, and they say, especially after they've been out on a tour with the pupils, they come back and they say, it just feels amazing. The atmosphere is fantastic, and there's, you know, people are enjoying being here. The staff and the pupils interact well. So I think it's the people. I think it's very special what we have in terms of relationships between people.
But at the end of the day, when people meet up, be it at a rugby match, be it a rugby international, or whatever, they say, oh, you're from Edinburgh. What school did you go to? Oh, I went to Heriots. And that immediately gives you a bond. And everybody knows somebody else that's been to Heriot, even if it is Andy Irvine or Kenny Scotland and so on.
Oh, I think there's no doubt that the ethos has to come from the top. In my day, the headmaster was Bill Dewar. He was succeeded by Alan MacDonald, who was a great chap. His son Jim was one of my close friends at school. We were in the same class together. He was then followed by Keith Pearson, again, who did an absolutely super job. Alistair Hector, another great headmaster. And now Leslie, you know, the tributes that are here about Leslie are just amazing. So I think we've been extremely fortunate in that we've had great headmasters.
I think it has a very, very special sense of community. And we've just been talking about that in terms of how well pupils know each other within their year group and across the year groups.
There were times, particularly in my early years, when I'm quite sure if the school had said, well, we just can't afford to pay you anymore, I'd just have come in and done it anyway. I really, really liked it. I used to hate the summer holidays in my early days of my teaching career. Didn't have very much money, so there wasn't very much to do. I just hang around waiting for the new teaching year to begin so I could start teaching again.
There's huge pride. I think the saying once a Heritor, always a Heritor really means things when Heritors say it. During my time as headmaster here, I encountered that a lot whenever I met FPs.
It's a tremendous thing. It binds us together, I think, totally binds us together. My best friends to this day are people I went to school with.
I think what made it a happy place, I think I've may have mentioned, but it's the fact that everyone's accepted. Everyone's accepted. You're all part of the school. No matter your background, no matter your faith, your creed, your colour, anything like that. You're all supported as well. The teachers were particularly supportive. Not everybody in my days, but there were certain teachers that were particularly special that supported you to achieve.
I always like to think that the pupils at Heriots know who they are and what they stand for. And so if you're on a bus and you see, and I'm on buses more now sadly I have a bus pass. They call it the entitlement card, I call it a bus pass. And you see Heriots pupils giving up their seat and things like that. That's not rocket science, but that's kindness in itself for elderly people. I'm not talking about this elderly, but for really elderly and frail people that are on the buses. I think that kind of thing, and it symbolises the ethos of what Heriots is all about.
I don't think it changes the person that you are. I think it polishes up the person that you are. In fact, thinking back to, again, geology, I did a bit of geology at school, and we took rocks from the seashore, and we did some lapidary on some of them, and it polished a bit like that. The rock's the same, it's the same chemical compound, but it's shinier. And I think that's the main bit about it. It polishes it. It's the polishing paste, if you like. It helps you to be a bit shinier and brighter, and yeah, it's a bit sparklier.
I do feel incredibly nostalgic about the place. Walking in today, as the first time I've done that in tens of years, I kind of felt I wish I was back, really, because it was a great time in my life, and everybody that all my friends, they feel the same way about it.
There's maybe a feeling of Heriots being, well, certainly in my day, if you mention Heriots to my friends at my primary school, my local primary school, oh, Heriots, and it just wasn't like that. And I think that taught me an awful lot about life, about how it doesn't matter what background you come from, it doesn't matter how much money you've got, If you're able to see people for what they are, understand how to speak and listen to people and to develop people and be developed, I think that's probably the secret to success. Look for the good. In fact, the headmaster at that time, Alan S. MacDonald, always said it didn't matter how or in what way you contributed. It didn't matter what job you did when you came out of Heriots. You could be a refuse collector, you could be the head of the government. It didn't matter as long as you contributed to society in some sort of way. And I think that's it, to be able to contribute, to be able to help other people to contribute, and just the way that you are, the way that you go about your life, and trying not to be judgmental about things and trying to include everyone.
There's a confidence that the education that you get from Heriots provides you. I think all of my friends have commented on this. Some call it arrogance, but it's not arrogance. It's actually just an inner confidence that one can do what one wants.
My daughter goes to Heriot's. She's in primary 6, and girl power is really strong amongst them, and I think that's really, really positive. I see the girls that have left school now, and my own daughter coming home really empowered, and really they can do anything. They can do what they like. And I think that's been a really, really healthy thing that's developed in the school, and something I'm very proud to be associated with, and delighted my daughter's here.
Once you're in the school, you never made feel any different to anybody else. You were totally integrated into the school. It was a nice place. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my time at school. I didn't excel at anything. I wasn't a troublemaker. I just sort of went through the classes, did what I needed to do, but I enjoyed my time at Heriots, definitely.
I didn't necessarily stick in as well as I could have at school, but the school stuck in with me, if that makes sense. And I wanted to be a cop, and the support I got from Heriots to enable me to become a police officer, which is something I've done now for 31 years, was brilliant.
When I was 12, I was in a very bad car accident in which I believed for some time my mother had been killed. So I was very badly traumatized by this event. And my father, very much against what he wanted to do, but my father was persuaded by me that I should, the school should at least know that this had happened 48 hours after the event when I went back to school. And I took in this letter that my father said, we've all been in a car accident. My wife has been very badly injured. Cameron seems to be fine. And I handed it into my registration teacher, and nobody said anything about it. Now, these days, of course, there would be a protocol brought in with 8 caring professionals would suddenly be surrounding me and making sure I was okay. Every 10 minutes somebody would say, you're all right, you know, you need to go to matron. And if I went to matron would know exactly what was wrong with me and love me.
You know, to look back on your childhood and your education at school, both primary and secondary, to not look back and view it as something that you have to do, but to look back on it as the formative experience of your life is something that I cherish, and so my life would have been immeasurably different had I not been at Heriot.
In 2011, I gave a speech at Open Morning, and I'd completely forgotten this. It was Mrs. Franklin who actually found it. And I said in that speech that I distribute cheerfully was the school's motto, and I talked about what I thought that meant. But I said that the unofficial motto should be work hard, be kind to each other, be happy. And that, for reasons which I don't fully understand, kind of stuck. So I think that, and I believe that very simple message is actually quite integral to where the school is at now. So I sort of slightly accidentally, in dashing off this speech, created that aspect, and that became, I don't know whether that led the ethos or the ethos led that.
This unofficial motto created by Cam and Wiley is something that perfectly reflects the school's ethos and how it has changed to fit the modern day, but still retain the core values that the school was built on. But at the end of the day, what really makes the school the way it is are the pupils.
Well, the most outstanding aspect of Heriot is are the young people and the way the young people interrelate to each other. And that then creates a situation in which the staff, who are so grateful to be dealing with these fantastic young people, or at least they ought to be, are really, really nice and go the extra mile and work very hard with the kids and really want them to do well, because the staff and the parents are so grateful. I mean, one thing that used to be said an awful lot, particularly when I was the principal, was people used to say things like, oh, you'll have a tough time with the parents. That was nonsense. The parents were great. The parents were so supportive. I mean, the parents only complained about things if there was something to complain about. And generally speaking, they were right to complain. And I mean, you know, it wasn't necessary to be defensive at all. We just said, yeah, actually, that shouldn't have happened. I'll do something about that.
We get all these emails from passengers on the 23 bus saying, oh, a marvellous Herioter stood up and gave me their seat, you know, and it's amazing that people take time to write these things into it.
You know, we're just as happy. Somebody might be getting 5 or 6 A's, they might be getting 5 or 6 A band 1s, but we are just as happy, you know, when we hear of stories about somebody giving up their seat on the bus, somebody doing something, stopping and talking to somebody who's homeless in the street. That gives us as much pleasure as people who are clearly gifted academically.
I was struck, in fact, when I went to the Royal Infirmary, the new Royal Infirmary, and there's down one of the corridors, there's a large plaque of wood on the wall, and in it tells the story of how boys from Heriots would bring armfuls of daffodils to the patients in the Royal Infirmary, which used to be, of course, just across the road from here, which I thought was a lovely story. And I think that's great. That's what distributing cheerfully should be about.
I think the relationship between the staff and the pupils is first class. I really do think it's first class. It's really, that does not happen in every single school. But at the end of the day, the pupils, I think, really, particularly when we come to something like Open Day, and you know, we can get 500 pupils out, senior school pupils out on when they could be lying in their bed, you know, having a rest from rugby or whatever it is, or just having a rest on a Saturday morning, having a lullaby on a Saturday morning, and they're out there and they're selling the school. And you know, when I say selling, I come back to that. It's not selling the school in the sense of, you know, money. It's selling the school for what it really stands for, which comes back to that word, ethos.
But I think, you know, and I think that your kind of onboarding experience at Heriot's is extraordinary. You know, when you come to an open day, then you don't get taken round by kind of teachers or kind of assigned adults. You get taken round by children. You know, the school puts the trust of its future kind of income, in many respects, in the hands of its current pupils, and I think that's a really you know, strong sense of trust and a sense of kind of self-belief that actually the end product that you are creating and kind of is strong enough that that will actually kind of, that's your best sales pitch.
The best thing about it, however, is that, I mean, you're writing a blank cheque for pupils who are going around. Now, they could badmouth the school, they could go around and say, well, what are you wanting to bring your kids here for? This is a terrible place. But actually, the nice thing about it is that the parents, when they come into the office eventually, the first thing they say is, or I say, who was it that showed you around? And they say, it was Cameron and Fahim. And I say something like, oh yeah, they're 2 great boys in S6. You were doing it last year, the 2 great boys in S6. And they say, oh, they were fantastic. And the other thing about it is that they usually follow that up with saying the pride in the school is just really, really obvious. And it comes back to what I said earlier about, we like our pupils to know who they are and what they are, what they represent. And our pupils are our best ambassadors.
I used to say to prospective parents that there will be a pupil at George Heriots School whose parents own a ski lodge, and there will be a pupil at George Heriots School whose parents own, a super yacht, probably. But I don't know who they are, and I don't know if they'll be talking about it all that much, because I think the fact of the foundation, the fact that there are people in your midst who don't have very much money, I think that makes a difference to the way you approach your peers. I just think it's bound to. I do think the Heriots pupils, broadly speaking, are very modest. I think that's a real characteristic of it. They're confident and they're smiley. They're kind of kindly in their approach to the world, but they're modest, and I think that modesty partly comes about. They're not brash.
I can't remember the kid it was. He's probably left school now. He will have left school now. And I remember meeting him on day 1, and I was saying to him, do you know where you're going? He was in the playground the first year of running around like headless chickens. They're not sure where the bell rings, and they're not sure whether it's Monday or Wednesday or whether, they're running. And I said, do you know where you're going? And he said, no, where's the chemistry department? I said, right, the chemistry department is down there. I'll just walk you down to the chemistry department. And he said, who are you? And I said, I'm Mr. Dixon, you may or may not, you'll certainly see me at assembly and so on and so forth. And he said, Mr. Dixon, I want you to know, and it was slightly pompous in some ways, but he didn't mean it to be like that at all. If somebody looking in and thought, who is this boy? He's full of pomposity. But in actual fact, he said, Mr. Dixon, I am just so pleased to be here. And I thought, that's fantastic. That is just fantastic.
I think Heriots go out of their way to nurture what the children's talents are in any direction, and I think that's so important in this world, because we don't live in a world academics. We need everybody to do everything, and and I think that's very important. And I think that's possibly, in my estimation, one of the reasons why Heriots is probably very successful.
But we're not just an academic school. I mean, I always say this. I mean, when we encourage people to give of their best, there are some people who have gifts academically. We've got some very, very gifted academic people, but then we've got other people who've got completely different gifts.
I did a master's qualification in looking at marketing and what makes people keen on schools. I looked at schools in particular, and the main thing that parents choose schools for is the appearance of the pupils about in the city and the behaviour of those pupils. And our pupils are brilliant when they're out and about in Edinburgh. They look smart, and they're polite and well behaved, and they are aware of the general public and of their conduct when they're outside. So the pupils sell the school massively, and that's great.
I can't judge whether it's in the best place now that it's ever been, because I've not been here for the past 400 years. But what I would say is that I think it's in a very good place. It depends on how you want to measure things. I think there are 3 ways of measuring, maybe, at least. One is how many people want to come to your school. Well, they're absolutely overflowing with applicants. The second thing is, what are the exam results like? Now, I'm a bit cautious about that one, but the exam results are extremely good. And the third one is, how personally happy are the pupils? I think a really important statistic is the proportion of pupils who on any one day are not at school. Who stays off at Heriots is a really interesting question. And the answer is that our absence statistics are very good, in the sense that people come to school. So I don't think there's an awful lot of people who are getting up in the morning and thinking, I'm going to pretend to be sick because I don't want to go to school. I just don't believe that.
When Chris Sibbald was clapped out of the Assembly Hall after the prize giving, he was inconsolable as he passed. And I was standing there at the lectern, and Mr. Wiley on the other side of the platform and the lectern. And he was sobbing as he went out. He really was sobbing. And it's very, very difficult when you're standing there reading to keep your composure and to say, you know, and there's that terrible music going on in the background as well, which is, you know, setting the grannies off and the upstairs and so on and so forth. But, you know, there is a feeling, and again, it comes back to this close bond between the staff and the pupils, that you have done your job at that point. It's not that we want everybody to go off the lawn at June Day or at prize giving, crying uncontrollably, but it nevertheless tells me something about the pupils that do, and the basic point is that they care.
Do I think that Heriot stands out from the others? And I think in lots of respects it does, and one always wants to be careful about that, just in terms of the idea that obviously I'm extremely loyal to Heriot, so I would say that, wouldn't I? I mean, that's true. But there's no doubt that Heriot is very, very popular in the city at the moment. I mean, I think there is quite a strong view that Heriot is the school that a lot of people want to get their children into, and you can see that by the application rates. And I think that it's because, in this tremendous sentimental way, I would say it's because the Heriots kids are so absolutely fantastic. They're so nice to each other. I don't believe, I mean, when, we were inspected quite recently before I retired, and the inspectors were astonished by the levels of good nature they were finding everywhere, that everybody was so polite and nice to each other. And the inspection before, I remember, they went off. There were a lot of inspectors in that one, and they went off at one point at break. They just didn't come for coffee. They just all disappeared. And they'd all walked as far as they could to different corners of the school to find out, who was being got at behind the lockers or what was happening in the toilets. And they came back and said, it's absolutely amazing. There was nobody on duty, because we don't have staff on duty at break or lunchtime here. And they there was just nothing happening that was wrong. How do you achieve this? I can answer how you achieve it. You achieve it by saying, there are three ways you achieve it. You achieve it by saying, right, that kid who's coming in and trying to get in, do they seem like a nice kid? That's the first thing. The second thing is, so the nice kid comes in and they are nice and they're encouraged in an ethos of niceness because people are nice to them. And then there's the third thing, which I call the Robert Dixon factor. And the Robert Dixon factor is this. I used to say to prospective parents, Heriot is like a very large green park with lots of lovely things going on in it. So there's a fairground and there's ice cream and there's all this lovely thing. It's constantly sunny and everybody loves it. But at the edge of the fairground, at the edge of this green park, there's a big dark forest, and the children are told that they mustn't go to the big dark forest. And sometimes children go and look into the dark forest and they draw back. And once in a very blue moon, some foolish child puts their foot into the dark forest, and then they come back without their foot. And that aspect, the idea that you have rules around the edges, is incredibly important to the current success of Heriot. I mean, absolutely incredibly important. But as important as the ethos of kindness, I would say, is the idea that if by any chance you weren't kind, you were going to be flayed alive, and that's just how it was.
And there was one very, very, for me, it was very moving meeting with a pupil. In fact, I wrote to his father afterwards, and his father wrote back to me once I'd actually left the school. I got this letter coming through my door at home, and this was somebody who had been in trouble off and on over the years, but we'd persevered with him. We'd kept him in, kept him on board, and he came up and said thank you, and I thought, well, that's absolutely, he made a point of coming and shaking my hand and saying thank you. And we were virtually the last people off the lawns. And that was a very, very moving moment for me, but it also for me kind of encapsulated the relationship and what we were trying to do. He'd had his ins and outs with the school. He was definitely on side. He'll definitely say he was a Herioter till the end of his days, I would imagine. But he's ready to move on to the next stage, and that's a positive thing.
But you've this big thing about the rights respecting school. Okay, so the man comes in initially to do the testing for the rights respecting school, bronze level, level one, okay? And he flies up from Manchester working for UNICEF, and he says, look, a very nice guy, and he said, look, Mr. Wiley, he said, you're not going to get this, nobody gets it the first time round. He said, I'm just telling you this now before I go off and do the inspection. And I said, no, we'll get it. And I said, I just know we'll get it because, you know, Mr. Seaton had worked incredibly hard, and I just felt that looking at the stuff that we were going to get it. So he comes back 6 hours later and says, I'm going to tell you, we're definitely recommending that you get it, and you should be going for the higher award, in fact. And the point that he was very keen to make was it was absolutely clear that people understood about rules here, and that if you're going to respect children's rights, then that doesn't mean giving them absolute freedom to do anything they want. It means making them all aware of that they subscribe to these rules.
And I think the thing that struck me through all the years that I've been connected with, how proud ex-Heriot pupils are of having been at the school. And it comes out naturally. It's not a big thing. They don't make a big thing about it, you know. And also how many connections people have kept up over the years through having been at Heriots.
The school has always put its pupils at the heart of everything they do. It's this ideology that the school was founded on, originally being a school for orphans. This idea is the most important aspect of the school and still carries on today with the Foundationer Scheme and Foundation 400. The Foundationer Scheme means that any child who has lost either one or both parents can apply for education at the school with either partial or full bursarial aids for their child's education.
I think the most important thing about Heriots, it struck me very early on, was the foundation and the whole idea of somebody creating a school like this for children who'd lost their fathers. I think it really, and now of course the foundation extends to children who've lost their mothers as well.
The foundation, that's a kind of, I think, an aspect of the school that's very close to my heart. Not that I was a foundationer, but that I think it really embodies the kind of ethos of the school and something that helps to foster the kind of great community spirit and kind of, I guess, the sense of humbleness that you get at Heriots.
When I was in third year at school, very sadly, my father passed away, and obviously it was a huge blow to my mother and myself because there was just the two of us at home. But the school were incredibly understanding and helpful. From a mother's point of view, the main concern was could she still afford to keep me at school? And the school assured her that because I was a pupil, I would convert to foundationer status. And they assisted not only in paying my school fees, but they also helped with a financial grant as well to cover school uniform and that sort of thing. And I think that's one of the great things about this school. The foundation is so strong, and it's obviously from a youngster's point of view, it's very sad if they do lose a parent while they're at school, but at least the school's there to look after them.
The foundation, and everybody will have said this, but the foundation is the heart and spine of the school. And without the foundation, Heriots would just be another private school, really. Now, no objection to private schools, but one of the things I always said when I was principal was that I wasn't there to defend the private sector. I was there to defend George Heriots School, and that was partly because of the foundation. So the answer is that aspect remains the same, but inevitably it's changed because, of course, in the 19th century it became a fee-paying school. So the fees were raised to support the foundation, and now you have this situation where the foundationers are a sort of, what about 1 in 20 of the entire school population. So inevitably there's been a change in that kind of respect. The school has become a mainstream academic school with the foundation as an absolutely integral central part of it.
People always thought that it was a kind of pot of gold from which we paid the fees for the foundationers, but that's not the case, and the foundationers' fees were actually paid by other parents. So what we're trying to do now is to raise enough money so that we do have a pot, so that we can pay for the foundationers from that. And people often want to give back to the school, so if we can give back and say to them, your money will be kept in this fund, only for the foundation, so you will be making a contribution to changing someone's life because you will give them an opportunity at Heriots. That's a nice thing to give money for, rather than just giving money and you don't know what's going to happen to it.
Being a foundationer, what that meant was, well, the school had certain standards and obviously with books to receive and that sort of thing. And what that meant was that because of the foundationer scheme, that the fees at the school were met completely. There was a clothing allowance which helped to purchase all the sort of the blazers and all that sort of thing, the standard kit, and all the books were provided to us for all the classes that we undertook. And it was really, there was more than that. There was, apart from that, and the foundationers, on Founders Day, the special foundationers lunch, that was really it. You didn't ever hear very much about, you were not singled out. You weren't singled out in any way. Not, oh, he's the foundationer, or it just didn't come into it. And that was really as much as I can say about the foundation, because as a boy you don't really understand what it means, I suppose. It's a school, it's your school, and you go to the school, and yeah, you go and get your uniform and eat kind of living, and you do your work and do your stuff. But yeah, it's when you looking back, thinking of it in today's terms, it was a massive advantage. It was a great privilege, I suppose, to be able to come to the school. That probably I realised after I'd been here, many years after I'd been here. It was just a natural thing at the time, but being a foundationer, you were just like anybody else.
And the groundedness all comes back to the foundation. It comes back to the foundation. It comes back to the fact there are another 100 kids in the school who get some kind of bursarial aid. A lot of them get bursarial aid. There are the children here who either are or have been in care. There are refugees. There are people who don't have anything. I mean, I remember at one point in a class I was covering once, watching two boys who were great friends sitting one another, and I knew there was something I wanted to think about this friendship, and what I wanted to think about it was that one of the boys had a parent who I knew to be a multimillionaire, and the other boy was from a single parent family, and his mother literally took in washing for a living. I mean, she was a laundress. She probably had an overall income of 10,000 a year or something. And it was, and it was kind of thinking, actually, this school has made these two people come together. Where's your comprehensive now?
People take it, they think, why should you be a charity when you've got all these rich fee-paying parents? You must be rolling in money. But in fact, we have proved that, we've gone through tests with Oscar, and Oscar's the board that looks at this, and proved that we are a charity because of the amount of money we give away. That's the main reason, amount of money we give away in places, but we also do other partnership work, etc. But the main thing is the money. In
terms of the foundation, I think that goes to the very heart of Heriot's ethos. I mean, to go back, Jingle and Geordie and his money, Featherless Bairns of Edinburgh, is absolutely what this place is founded upon. And so I think the use of the term foundationer is really, really appropriate. I think around about 5% of the school are foundation. Pardon me, I think that is really phenomenal. I know several kids who are my peer group who are foundationers, and the bounce that's given them in life has been tremendous. And I almost count myself in that. I wasn't a foundationer. But my father was dead when I came to Heriots, and frankly, the love, the support that I felt round about that from staff, from friends that I made here, made that journey so much easier. And I know that's a feeling that's shared by a number of friends who lost a parent at some point during their school career. Really, really difficult time, but this place and the support that it offers was phenomenal. So the foundation is a great thing, and now we have things, seasons for growth at the school to enable kids who have had that loss to actually go and talk about it in a way that wasn't even open to me in the 80s is a phenomenal thing. And some of my children's friends go to that, and they get to bring a friend with them to Seasons for Growth. And so my kids come home and talk really positively about that, and that enables them, I think, to really support their friends too. So foundationers, absolutely central to this place, and are probably the best advert for Heriots that's out there.
This foundation and generosity is something that the school is very proud of and would not be possible if it weren't for the original generosity of the founder, George Herriot. It is something that continues to affect the children's lives every single day since the school was founded, and such huge generosity is something that is celebrated at every opportunity. This strong sense of gratitude is so strong that Herioters who live all around the world have a very strong connection to the school and can be found in nearly every continent. We've taken a trip across the pond to New York, one of the most modern and influential cities in the world. We've come here to meet with ex-Herioter Justin Sharon.
Hi.
A freelance writer who has lived in Manhattan since he left Heriots in 1987 to see what Heriots' international presence is like on the other side of the world. We went to visit him in his apartment in Upper Manhattan to talk to him about his connections with the school, and while we were there, he showed us his expansive and fascinating collection of Heriots memorabilia.
This is my flat, and there's a fair bit of Heriots memorabilia here. This is taken in 1984. It's a long time ago now, but I was lucky enough to win the Alexander Cooper Award for achievement in Form 3. So, and that always gets commented upon. Visitors to the apartment. What a backdrop! I mean, what playground in the world has a view of the castle? It really absolute fairy tale. So that was pre-smartphone era, of course, but I'm glad I have a hard copy of that. And I'll take you along here. This is one of the Heriots fine china cups that I got on one of my many trips back to Edinburgh. I got that in Lawson Place. Here's a kind of dog-eared but very sentimental copy of the Herioter yearbook from 1987 rather. That was they did a trip to Zimbabwe that year, and so I've kept that pride of place. And here's a really interesting one. This is very 1980s, and I was bidding on this on eBay, and it got into a real bidding war. And it's essentially just a plastic, folder system, very popular in the States at the time. And I ended up winning it, but I had to pay way over the odds. It went up to about $1,000, and so I got an email the next day from someone who said, "We came in second. You beat us to the punch, but I'm a Hollywood producer, and we really need this as a prop for our movie we're shooting. So any chance, you could loan it to us?" I said, "Yeah, no worries. What's the movie?" And he said it was Perks of Being a Wallflower. It came out in 2011, I think, starring Emma Watson. So of course we got talking, and I mentioned that I went to the school that was the inspiration for Hogwarts, so Emma ended up writing a really nice thing here. "Dear Justin, glad to see all your hard work at Heriots has paid off. Studying may have seemed tough at the time, but this shows that there are indeed some perks of being a wallflower. Best regards, Emma Watson and Sam, who was her character." So that's quite a Heriots Harry Potter related story. And this is Colin Baxter had some lovely photographs of Heriots in the 1980s. So this is one taken back then, and that has pride of place on my desk. Whenever I need inspiration, I'll glance up at that. Here I got that out in anticipation of your visit. Interestingly enough, my mother worked as an editor at Scottish Home and Country, and what was the address? Lo and behold, Heriot Row. And my father was also on Wall Street a gold analyst, and of course Jingle and Geordie was a goldsmith to the court of royalty. So it's almost like written in the stars that I'd end up at Heriots. And this is just another version of the 1984 photo. And here's a couple other publications. This was a mini reunion that I organized in 2007. So it was 20 years to the day after we graduated from Heriots, and we had a small gathering, maybe 10 of us, at Doctor's Bar right by the school, and that was good fun. It was sort of the Friends Reunited days. It was even pre-Facebook, but quite enjoyed that. Now this was the interesting one. Now this was our official 25th anniversary reunion in 2012. And it was literally the week of Superstorm Sandy, so I think I got the last flight out. but wild horses weren't going to prevent me from attending the reunion. And of course I had a wee dram toasting the school, and a lot of good memories at Sandy Bell's, a very appropriately named pub around the corner. So that was a nice kind of way to reminisce. And here's I think that's the subsequent issue, the official write-up on the reunion. And so a lot of us, a bit less hair and a bit more stomach than we did back in the day, but it was wonderful, and the years really rolled away, and it was as if no time at all had gone by. So this is the the FP scarf, and I've worn this on many a cold Manhattan January day and night. Good thick wool. I got that at Aiken and Niven a couple of years ago, and this is actually the latest quadrangle, which I subscribed to, and as fate would have it, it arrived in the mail just last week, and it's a really, really good publication. And again, it speaks volumes to what a wonderful school and high achieving alumnus, or as we say in America, former pupils are associated with it. Yeah, and of course this is the coaster to go along with the Heriots mug. So many a coffee has rested on this over the years. Sometimes distance lends enchantment. As the years have gone by and sort of living in the States, I really appreciate more than ever the caliber of education that Heriots offered. It's funny, just across the way there's a school, the Chapin School, which is an all-girls school, very prestigious, and $50,000 a year tuition. Jackie Onassis went there, the Queen of Jordan, but frankly, it's not a patch on Heriots in terms of the standard. And I thank my lucky stars that I went to Heriots. And just to give you a sense of the caliber of academics, for my hires, I got a few A's, but I certainly was not Ducks material. I was able to effectively skip the bulk of the first year at university in Boston. So the penultimate year at Heriots was equivalent to the first year at uni here in terms of standards. So that really says everything. Actually, I still have assorted aunts and uncles and cousins in Edinburgh, so I'll always do this sort of nostalgia tour every time I'm back, and I'll pop in. And of course, pretty much I think at this point all of the teachers from my day have left now, but still a marvel at the architecture. It was the foundation stone went down in 1628, which was the decade that the Pilgrims set sail for the Mayflower. So really remarkable. And yeah, I always enjoy going back and kind of revisiting my youth and seeing how it's changed and evolved.
After New York, we headed north to Toronto, another city with a strong Heriots connection. We went to talk to Michael West about his Heriots connection while living so far away, and some of the friends he's met along his travels.
An old classmate by chance in Winnipeg, Frederick Innes, and his family emigrated to Canada in the 60s, and I met him purely by accident in Winnipeg when I was living there for a couple of years. And that's how I started to maybe get more interested again in Heriots. And I went back for the 350th year dinner, and that was quite an experience. I've reconnected with a couple of old schoolmates, one back in Scotland and one in the States now, that we went to university together. The last time was 84. My dad and I went back to the school and we watched the pipe band practicing on the lawn, and talked to Jack Crichton, who's my pipe teacher, bagpipe teacher. I was in the pipe band when I was at school. I was a pipe major in 68. Well, I think it's good to recognise the foresight of the founder in many ways, and it wasn't just for boys, it was for boys and girls. And if there hadn't been for Heriot, maybe Henry Rayburn would never have been to Heriot and wouldn't have become the portrait painter, famous guy in the 19th century. But more importantly, we had foundationers at school, and I think that was incredibly forward-looking for the time. Just growing up in a more inclusive environment, I mean, it was a very traditional, rigid sort of environment back in the day when I was at school, and I think that detracted from a lot of the modern day realities. And certainly I played once at James Gillespie's Burns Night, the school for girls. The pipe major had to go there and do that, and it was like a foreign country. Because I didn't have any sisters or anything like that, so it was certainly a boys' world at Heriots.
Across the world, there are groups of Herioters that meet up regularly and are part of what's called the Heriot Club. The Heriot Club is a collection of ex-pupils who meet up and come together in order to stay in touch with friends and other Herioters. The main Heriot Club was based in Edinburgh, independent of the school, but has recently been merged with the school and its development office to be more inclusive of every pupil. The daughter clubs, which are all over the world, have still remained as they are, as it is where large portions of Herioters who have migrated abroad still stay in touch. The function of the Heriot Club will still continue, and it will still be provided to pupils in order to stay in touch and be a part of the community that they've been educated in, but to be more inclusive of every pupil that comes through the school.
They're always evolving, actually, the Heriot Club, you know, and both is obviously a central Heriot Club that's based in Edinburgh, and then there are kind of sister clubs, you know, locally as far as the borders to as far away as Ontario and Sydney and Hong Kong. And, you know, I think they are, you know, the purpose of these clubs in an age prior to social media and kind of digital communications, you know, these were, you know, opportunities for people when they were moving abroad to try and find local networks that kind of had similar interests, and it's amazing. You know, I've got a kind of real passion for the Scottish diaspora. You know, we're a country of 5 million people, and yet we have this kind of global network as a kind of nation, and the Heriot clubs around the world embody that as well. You know, there's this kind of, I guess, this deep-spirited, values-led kind of education as a kind of human being, and that's why these clubs are so successful. And interestingly, whilst I would say that the kind of local clubs struggle more, actually in kind of bigger metropolitan areas like London and certainly in Canada and Australia, the clubs are still thriving, which I think says a lot, you know, particularly in this age where, you know, communication with your kind of fellow person is so easy, literally in your pocket, and I think that says a lot about the Heriot clubs, actually.
It took me 3 or 4 years from leaving school in some ways to realise that I'd actually physically left school in terms of the continuity of friendships, relationships, and the week-to-week, you know, people I would meet, you know, of all ages, considerably older than myself.
Well, in my day, we had to be the dutiful wife, and we went to a lot of the Heriot Club. So I sat through a lot of pretty boring Heriot dinners, I must admit. And I was almost word perfect on the theme of our pious founder. So it was very refreshing laterally when we had a lady president took over and things changed completely and the format changed completely. But again, the connections we made worldwide through the Heriot Club were quite interesting, because it was an automatic thing that the presidents went to all the airs and attended the dinners there. And again, I've still got several friends that I met through Heriot connections at those dinners.
Well, I think there's no doubt that, you know, the saying, once a Herioter, always a Herioter, there's a lot to that. I mean, it's not only just in Edinburgh. You know, I've been fortunate enough to travel through business and mostly rugby to many parts of the world, and I can assure you I've come across Herioters in New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, South Africa, America, France, Italy. It's amazing, the Heriot network, and I think it's a wonderful thing just to keep in touch.
But it's a base for so many things. It used to be the old school tie for business contacts. That's not so important now, but it is definitely a social contact when you're out with Edinburgh or out with Scotland, you know.
Times have moved on a bit. Partly because of social media, people do keep in touch with those whom they want to keep in touch with. Also, the idea of a club being quite an exclusive thing is perhaps not as appealing to younger FPs, and so that's why we've made the recent change that we have, that everyone's a Herioter, everyone who's at school's a Herioter, so everyone's part of, I suppose, a very, very large club that includes everyone. And that idea has been well received by what was the official Heriot Club and by the school's development office. So they're really keen now to work together under the development office of the school to make sure that events happen and that people are in touch with each other.
It's definitely empowered it. It's so much easier for FPs to keep in touch with each other now. Yeah, and it's lovely to see these dinners and these reunions that are made. The class of whatever, the class of such and such, because that was a thing that just didn't exist in the early days when I was involved in it at all. It was purely the Heriot dinners, you know.
It's a great thing for just keeping people together who formed a bond in this place. Throughout school days, the challenges that brings. So I think the whole notion of the Heriot Club is a really, really good thing. Hope we can develop that in the new structure, the new ethos, and bring more people together more regularly under that Heriot banner. So Heriot Club's a really good idea and a good concept.
I think that it also is an age thing. There's no doubt about it. It's an age thing. Yeah, and I do remember Grant going with us to one Heriot dinner. I can't even remember what year it was. And I remember him saying, "Oh, for heaven's sake, I'm never going to get involved with that. It's so boring and so elderly." Now, he finished up being a president of the Heriot Club. so that tells you something. But he's a bit older and wiser now, I think.
There we are. My cricket was influenced mainly by my junior school teacher, Leslie Lindsay Mitchell, who was my teacher in 12L. Lindsay, as he was known as, or LLM, as he was known throughout, was at Heriot's himself. He went to university and came back immediately as a junior school teacher and spent the whole of his life at Heriot's. In other words, this pupil out to university and back taught till he was 65 or whatever. Now, he was the most influential man in my cricket career. My daughter, my firstborn, doesn't know why she's called Leslie Lindsay Moore. She's named after my cricket master, LL Leslie Lindsay Mitchell, LLM. She's LLM. She doesn't know why she's called that today, and I'm not going to tell her. That's how much of an influence he had in my life, that my firstborn was named after my cricket master.
I remember one occasion, my father died in 2006. My mother had died 8 years earlier. And as we cleared his house, I came across photographs of my school days that I hadn't seen for years. And one particular member of my class, we were both members of the pipe band, and a chap called Douglas Hamilton. And I was so intrigued by the photograph. We were photographed with our parents all together. I contacted the school to say, "Have you got any connection to this chap?" So, and they straight away they said, "Well, we have, and we'll ask him if he'd like to be in contact with you." And they did straight away, and I met him for a drink. And he had a remarkable story as well. He travels the world. He's a lighting technician. So from a guy who, I spent literally my entire school years from the age of 5 right through to when I left in 77. And we just felt like we just clicked into place. That we hadn't not seen each other for years. It was amazing. Real old friends routine. It was great.
These Heriot Clubs bring so many people together in so many special ways, and the recent change has already been well received by current members of the club and other pupils. The idea of the clubs is a great way to bring all those who come through the school together after they've left, and throughout its years, the school has had many wonderful people from all walks of life come through its gates, each with a different story to tell. Although amongst all the people who have come through the school, none have had more of a beneficial impact than those who came after a crucial change in 1979. This is when the decision was made to make Heriot's co-ed. Before then, Heriot's was an all-boys school, and in that year, then headmaster Keith Pearson made a change that has changed the school indefinitely, and the school simply wouldn't be the same today and may not even still be here if it weren't for the impact and positive influence that the girls have made on the school.
Keith Pearson's great move forward was the bringing of girls into the school, which of course changed it in all sorts of ways.
I think the girls have improved Heriot's not because I think girls are better than boys or anything like that. It's just that the ethos changes when you have girls and boys together.
It was when the girls were coming to Heriot's, there was actually a lot of people had never been to a school that had girls. They didn't have sisters, and they didn't know about girls, and there was a great fear about this. Oh, the girls are coming. Oh, what's it going to be like? And genuinely, And I'd been to school with girls, just like boys, really, just different. and this whole thing about who's going to be the first person to speak to the girl. I was the first person in the class to speak to the girl because I asked her a question or answered a question for her or something like that. And suddenly it was a relax. And there was another day, there was a prep girl, in fact it wasn't prep, it must have been junior school, very early junior school, very small girl, walking along to the refectory. And there was I can only describe as a swirling crowd of boys swinging up there, running in for their lunch, and they knocked this girl flying down from where the senior hall is, the library now it is, down on the banking, and she'd skinned her knee and everything like that. And I remember I was the only person who stopped and sort of got taken up and was just crying, and I had a handkerchief dabbed her knee, probably before the days of AIDS and all that sort of thing, and took her up and sort of led her towards her teacher, take her back to her teacher who was coming across for lunch at that time. And I remember my teacher I spoke about earlier, Miss Beattie, was coming down for her lunch. And again, I remember saying, "Oh, well done, Mackay, well done," because everybody else had just gone right past this wee girl and walked out. Just little things like that.
One of my kind of good friends, Cara Watt, was in the first cohort of girls at the school in 1979, and she kind of became the first female president of the Heriot Club, actually. She is a kind of a fantastic ambassador for Heriots, and I think is kind of a kind of shining, literally first-class example of why the decision to have girls at the school was probably one that came late, but thank goodness it did come.
Well, I was a university student, I think, or I just started teaching, I think. Of course, I taught at Stuart's Melville for 11 years, and I remember seeing my first Herioter in a skirt and thinking, that's really odd, that boy's wearing a skirt. And that was actually what I thought. And I thought, how very liberal of George Heriots School. There's a boy wearing a skirt there, and I thought, no, that's a girl, Cameron. And so it was. And I think these girls were very brave in lots of respects. I think it was managed very well at Heriots. It certainly wasn't managed terribly well in some other schools I could name, the access of girls. And I think I'm not saying it saved the school, but I don't think Heriots would exist as an all-boys school now.
It was a worry that was a needless worry, because they were just here, and they were in with the place, and that was it. And they never looked back. I think that's it was a good thing. It was the right decision for the school, and now you wouldn't give it a thought really that there wouldn't be a mixed school.
And also, interesting for members of staff, to get a female perspective on various subjects, I think must have made quite a difference.
I taught at Stuart's Melville for 11 years, and Stuart's Melville was a boys' school. Now, Stuart's Melville itself is very, very different now to what it was back then, so I'm not talking about Stuart's Melville these days, which I think is a very fine school, actually, and which holds on to its single-sex status broadly, although they have a lot of mixed things going on. So I arrived from Stuart's Melville, where I'd been very, very happy, very, very happy. And I'd left there partly because I wasn't all that keen on the then headmaster of Stuart's Melville, and I immediately liked Keith Pearson when I came for interview. So although I was coming sideways from Stuart's Melville, I decided that I was going to come to Heriots if I was offered the job, and much to my surprise, because my interview was not a great success, I didn't think, I was offered the job, and I came, and the rest is, for me, history, as it were. But I'd never taught girls before. And because I was a new man, rather ahead of my time, I thought, well, I'll just treat the girls right the same way as I treated the boys at Stuart's Melville. And I realised after about 5 minutes that literally wasn't going to work, because it seemed to me initially that girls were immune to my charm, that I arrived in a classroom and the girls all looked at me highly suspiciously, and the boys were up for a bit of a chat and up for a bit of banter and all this kind of stuff, and the girls weren't going to do anything. After about 4 or 5 weeks, I spoke to Mrs. Henderson, who you won't remember, who was the head of guidance then, a very, very wise woman. I kind of said, actually, I don't, and I kind of said, I'm kind of getting fine with the kids, but I do find the girls quite difficult. They don't seem to like me very much. And she said, oh no, the girls like you fine, she said, but they're just different. And then after about 2 or 3 months, there was a day when I wasn't well, and I went into my class, my top set third-year class, which I absolutely loved. It was a brilliant class, probably my favourite ever class. I have attended to date 7 of their weddings. And they were just a wonderful group of young people. But still, the girls were quite quiet. And I went in and I said, look, I'm really, really feeling terrible. I said, what I'm going to do is you just sit there and read Lord of the Flies or whatever it was for the double period, if you don't mind. I'll maybe ask you some questions in the middle, but I feel really sick and I've got a headache and I think I've got the flu. And one of the girls immediately said, do you want me to go to matron and get you some paracetamol? And I said, yeah, that'd be great. And she said to her mate, both fantastic girls who I still am in touch with, she said to her mate, you come with me so you can carry some water and open the doors. And it was just really interesting because, I was in Mr. Simpson's room, the 155, this beautiful wood panelled thing, which was about as far away from matron as you could get. And it was that crystallised for me what the difference was between boys and girls. Because to be absolutely honest, if I'd had a heart attack in front of a group of kids at Stuart's Melville, it would have taken ages for one of them to actually say, actually, he's really unwell. This is not a joke. We must stop laughing now. Let us go and get somebody. What do we do? Whereas the girls just immediately, went and did it. And girls, I don't care what anybody says. Girls and boys are different to educate. It's very, very good to educate them together. Girls civilise boys in all sorts of ways. And boys civilise girls in a completely different way, which is that I've never taught in a girls' school, but the temperature in girls' schools is very different in terms of personal relationships and things. And boys don't understand girls' bitchiness to each other. They just don't get it. They don't understand how you can be so rude. And girls having a fight is a terrible, terrible thing. Girls are fantastic 95% of the time, and they're so much more skilled than boys when they're 14 or 15, almost everything, but not, in my view, at friendship, which boys are better at, I think.
When the girls were introduced, somebody said to my son, oh, what's it like having girls at Heriot's? And he was silent for a wee while, and he said, I've got a sister and there's always girls in my house, so it's not any different.
Society is mixed, so therefore, why would your education not be mixed?
The introduction of girls into the school showed that Heriot's was a school that believed in education for all and truly embodied its ethos. Large acts of kindness are in the school's nature and history, and another one of the most notable acts was back during the First World War. In 1916, a number of young boys from Serbia made a treacherous journey over the mountains of Albania and Montenegro over the winter of 1915 and 1916 to escape Serbia after the country suffered a catastrophic defeat to Germany and its allies. Between 1916 and 1919, 27 of these boys were educated at Heriot, and it not only changed their own lives, but the history of Serbia. Some of these boys were the last surviving members of their community, and they're credited with having played the first ever Serbian international sporting match in Inverleith in 1918, and are also credited to have brought back rugby to Serbia following their return. This is one of the many stories that stuck out in Heriot's history, and the most recent of these being the story of the Syrian refugees.
It became clear that there were a significant number of young Syrian refugee children in the city, and it was all over the papers. It was clear that with the best will in the world, it would be a good thing to alleviate the burden of the state sector by having some of them in the school, and potentially life-changing. And of course, it coordinated coincidentally, with the 100th anniversary of the Serbian boys. So the Syrian boys, the Syrian children, who are 2 boys and 2 girls, in fact, are called Dukanovic bursars. And they're called Dukanovic bursars because Dr. Dukanovic was the last of the Syrian boys to die. And according to his granddaughter, the last thing he said was that he wanted to be buried in his Heriot's tie, which I think is an amazingly moving story. I just think it's sort of emblematic. Here's somebody who went through hell. There was no doubt whatsoever the Serbian boys' experience was, if anything, worse than the Syrian kids' experience, I think. Terrible, in the sense that, something like 80% of the Serbians were killed in the course of escaping during the First World War. And then they came here and their lives were sort of transformed. And Dr. Dukanovic, who probably was here until he was 18 and then went back to Serbia and became a very, very significant doctor. And you think, my goodness, he'd have died if it hadn't been for George Heriots School, probably. What would have happened to him?
The similarities in these stories really bring forward how Heriots holds on to its ethos and embodies it in every way. Unfortunately, education isn't free for everyone and will always cost something for someone, and there were only so many places that the school could give away, leaving them in a tough spot.
When we did decide we were going to take the Syrian refugees, and there are two things to say about that. First of all, I assumed that every other school in the city would be doing this. So I assumed that when I sent out an email to my HM, Headmasters Conference colleagues, saying we have these 11 children, as it was, and we're going to take 3 of them, can anyone help with the others? And only one other head teacher in the city responded. And I was amazed by that. And the other thing was that we weren't doing it for publicity. We got some publicity out of it anyway, because it came up and was mentioned, but we didn't let the television cameras in, for example, because we just thought that wasn't what it was about. It was a 2018 version of what Heriot would have wanted in 1628.
When Mr. Wiley and I were, what happened was the council got in touch with us, and then we thought this would be an amazing idea. You know, we could really help some people, and they brought them in. There were too many that came in that at the same time, so we had to select some, which was really, really difficult. So the families would come in, and we had interviews. There was me, Mr. Wiley, a social worker, and a person from the council, as well as the family. And sometimes there was a translator, and they're just so keen on education. You know, they've had terrible circumstances in their lives, and some of them, you know, just travelled by foot almost all the way here. And then they're so grateful. One of them even said, I'm just so grateful that you've even let me come into the school and speak to you. You know, no matter what happens, I've seen inside this place and learned a bit about the school. And then the ones that we did in the end choose, they were so humble and just so grateful, and these kids work so hard because they know that education can change their lives. So when we were talking about gratitude, these pupils are probably the most grateful pupils that we have, because they just wouldn't have any of this if we hadn't taken them in. So they just almost make you cry because they're so happy and so grateful. And it's been good for our pupils, you know, working with them and making friends with them and learning about them. It's been a real success story.
Interviewing the families of the Syrian refugees was might be the most moving thing that I did in my career. And we kind of knew it was going to be really hard, but it was actually much more difficult. Because it was just very difficult to stop yourself from kind of crying all the time while these people kind of told their stories or said this. And the thing that was most moving, and the thing that made us absolutely certain that taking in these people who had been through this hellish time really into the school was right, was the fact that without exception at the end of each of these interviews, obviously we had to say, well, you know, we're only going to be able to take, well, initially we thought 2, and then we made it 3, and now there are 4 of these children in. And the parents would all say, well, no, we understand that. We're just very grateful that you're talking to us. It's really nice that you're talking to us. And, you know, they're all our children, really. So if the ones who get in, that's great. Obviously, we'd like it to be our child, but if it's not our child, then good luck to the rest of them. It was a kind of, you know, I kind of wanted to film that and make it a model for how you enter George Heriots School. Say this and you'll get in, you know, say, you know, we understand it's really hard to get in here, and you're suggesting the kind of attitudes in yourselves that probably are in your children that mean that they'll do very well at the school. The social worker who came in with the Syrian refugees for the first meeting just wasn't interested at all. She just didn't think it was right that these kids were coming to a private school. She just didn't want them in the private school. And on the last time we met her, she said, look, I've just got to say, I just love this school. I love everybody's so nice and everybody's so sweet, and the kids are so obviously not stuck up, you know. So my view of what has happened in private schools has been completely altered. And I kind of wanted to say to her, yeah, your view of what happens at George Heriots School has been completely altered. It's not necessarily the same thing in every private school. I think private schools are in a gradation.
This brings us to the end of our look into George Heriots School. A wondrous place where I personally lived some of the greatest days of my life, and I hope now that you can see why so many people share this feeling with me after having an insight into the school and how it is a truly special place. But before we end, I'd like to share something with any pupils who are attending the school right now, or in future generations, or are maybe even about to leave. The making of this film has allowed me to sit down with some truly wonderful and engaging people, all of whom have taken time out of their days to share their thoughts on the school. And after talking with all of them, they were all asked about the same thing: to look back on their time and to share what their message to the pupils would be, because it really is a special place.
Well, I think from attending the school point of view, it's easy to say to kids that you've got to work hard and that you've got to pass your exams, but I think school's more than that. It's obviously very important that they try and do their best and that they attain the grades that they should attain. But I think what's just as important is they've got to try and enjoy themselves at school. And to me, if you enjoy yourself, then you're likely to try and apply yourself that bit better.
The pupils annoy me at Heriots. You might be surprised at this, but the pupils that annoy me at Heriots are the pupils that come in at 25 to 9 in the morning, they leave at 3:15 in the afternoon, and they don't get involved in the other aspects of the school, the extracurricular life of the school, and so on and so forth. And I think that is such a waste, because there's so much that you can get yourself involved in. You know, it goes back to me saying good, better, best. You should never rest your good is better than your better, best. Your best might not be what you do between 8:35 and 3:15. It might be between 3:15 and 5:30. It might be at a golf range. It might be on a horse, a equestrian club. There are just so many different opportunities that you can take part in here. And so I think my message to the pupils is kind of live for today, grasp opportunities that you get at Heriots and grasp them with both hands.
Don't take it for granted, actually, you know, and don't ever get complacent. You know, we should never lose sight of the privilege to, I guess, live in a city as fantastically beautiful and enriching in terms of history.
Basically, I mean, Courtney said sounds to really soak everything in and take advantage of everything, both sports and academics. I mean, it's not just academics. I mean, Golden Acre, Chariots of Fire was filmed there, and Andy Irvin, was there, and it's such a great all-round school, and the extracurriculars as well, and just really to take advantage of it and live every moment, and you look back and be very grateful you went to the school.
Don't look back with any regrets about what you could have, would have, should have done whilst you were at school. And I think there's no reason why you, with what's provided in front of you from the school facilities, teaching and tangible buildings, I think you'll do well if you've really given it your all.
I think I would tell them to make the most of the opportunity. It's far too easy to take Heriots for granted when one's on the inside. When you get outside, you realise it's a lot more special than it appears to be when you're there. It's still special when you're here, but afterwards you begin to realise that it's a really special place. But have fun too. I had a lot of fun while I was here.
Grasp the opportunity. Seize what's here. There are teachers, there are resources, there are clubs, there are societies, there are a peer group now who will be your friends for the rest of your life. Seize on that and make the absolute most of it. And if you manage that, whatever you go and do from leaving this place will be improved and will be enhanced by that Heriot experience. So just enjoy it.
Make the best of it. Make the best of Heriots while you're here, It's always a great thing that they say that you're wasted on the young, but as you get older you start to reflect back, and as I say, I've done well and I've enjoyed my time at Heriots. But if I'd just been able to maximise everything, it may have enhanced things in certain ways throughout my career. So I think that's the main message from an old guy to the young folks out there, or oldish guy. Try to make the best of it. Try and involve yourself in as much as possible without, and I mean that's external activity, the clubs and societies. It all helps to build you as a person. Absolutely, get involved, do your best, and make the best of what's here, because it's something that you realise more and more when you're away from school, 10 and 20 years down the line. That, you know what, that was a good thing, and that's taught me a good few lessons, and something that maybe you can't, not many people can say when they're younger, they can't reflect in that way. But yeah, make the best of it, folks.
I don't know. Probably something like love one another would be my message. Never be unkind would be my message. Do the best you can would be my message. But all of these are such cliches. The distinction is that probably if you asked that question to the retired principals or head teachers of any school, they would say much the same thing. They might not go as far as love one another, but at the end of the day, actually, it just works at Heriot. It's actually true. I mean, the eventual thing is it's all about love. I mean, that's what it's about. It's about the idea that you make your friends and you love them, and you love your school, and that you love your teachers, that you are a part of an institution. It's not clinical. It's about emotion, and it's about being part of a much bigger whole, and feeling yourself to be important.
The two types of moment that really stand out for me are the sadness and the joy that comes from here. Joy is a regular thing that comes through the school gate. Whether that's big things like VIP visits, whether that's great exam success both on a personal and a school-wide level. These are regular. Joy is a regular visitor here, and I think Heriots throughout the years have celebrated that joy really, really well. But we talk an awful lot about the Heriot community and the Heriot family, and when sorrow comes through the school gate, I think is the time where the school becomes truly remarkable. I remember one boy died when I was in third year. Somebody who I knew off, who I would speak to in a hello type thing in the playground, because I played in the pipe band, he was in the CCF, so our paths crossed. And I remember the assembly that morning. I'd never before experienced such an atmosphere, such a pensiveness amongst 1,000 people. I'd never seen so many tears amongst such a large cohort of individuals either. But I've also would make it fair to say I probably up until that point never felt such a collective love and support amongst such a cohort of people. So stand out for me, big memories, joy and sorrow, and on each of those, when each of those visitors arrive, Heriots do a fantastic job of either celebrating or supporting, often both.
Lights will guide you home and ignite your bones, and I will try to fix